Live NFL trivia every Tuesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge and have a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. NFL Primetime is one of the greatest shows of all time. I've raved about this show many times before, and for good reason. It changed the game in highlights and how we saw football. And with all the games that were shown, and all the catchphrases and quips that Chris Berman used to make, people look back on that show fondly with many great memories. But if you ask people what their favorite moment in the history of NFL Primetime was, most people would probably turn to Week 17 of the 1999 season. 4 words: we need more points. In the final week of the season, the Carolina Panthers and Green Bay Packers were fighting for a possible playoff spot, and because of how tiebreakers worked back then, the team that had the edge would be determined by net points in conference games. That led to this insane scenario where both the Packers and Panthers were up big, and instead of just trying to win, we're trying to win by as much as possible. From the way it was presented to the sheer insanity of it, the end of the 1999 season was nothing short of nuts. But here's the bad news to this story. Neither the Packers nor the Panthers made the postseason. When all was said and done, because the Cowboys won their game at 4 o'clock over the Giants, it made that entire back and forth completely meaningless. And unfortunately, with the way the NFL tiebreaker system is set up now, and has been set up since realignment and expansion in 2002, it's unlikely that this will ever come to fruition again. Point differential in conference games is the 6th tiebreaker now, meaning that for this to happen, 2 teams would have to be tied on head-to-head, winning percentage in the conference, winning percentage in common games, strength of victory, and strength of schedule. The NFL made it almost impossible for this chaotic scenario to play out again. So that raises a very important question. Has there ever been a we need more points scenario like the one we saw at the end of 1999 that actually mattered? Has there ever been a season that was decided by this metric? And the amazing thing is that this actually happened. To an extent, there was a season that ended with one team making the postseason over the other by scoring more points. And the fact that it happened might be one of the most miraculous ways ever that a team made it to the postseason. In 1979, the final spot in the NFC was decided off of point differential. And this is the story behind that. First, we need some context going into the final week of the season. For this, we have to go all the way back to 1970, because the NFL didn't used to have a set of tiebreakers. I made a video about that if you want to check that out in the upper right corner, but here's the short version. The 1970 season was the first time ever that the league had a wild card. The league, because of a severe lack of foresight, did not account for teams having the same record. Tiebreakers were head-to-head record and record within the conference. After that, it came down to a coin flip, literally. And during that 1970 season, the NFL was dangerously close to having an untelevised coin flip determine the final playoff spot, which I'm sure wouldn't have raised any eyebrows whatsoever. Fortunately, because the Rams beat the Giants on the final week, that didn't happen. But had the Giants won, a coin flip would have determined the final spot between the Cowboys and the Lions. After 1970, the league implemented a brand new tiebreaker system to ensure that nothing like this would ever happen again. A coin flip was now going to be the last resort, as it should be. The league tweaked the tiebreaker system a few times, but the basic premise was the same. Only after 5 or 6 options would a coin flip be necessary. In 1978, the top 3 tiebreakers were head-to-head record, then record against common opponents, then strength of schedule. But in 1979, the league altered the tiebreaking system. The first tiebreaker was head-to-head record, with the second one being record within the conference, and the third one, interestingly enough, being point differential across all games. Under this system, it was surprisingly easy for point differential to make a big difference. I made a video some time ago about how Washington was up 31-20 in a game against the Dallas Cowboys, and instead of just taking a knee after getting the ball with 15 seconds left, they opted to go for a field goal to extend their lead to 34-20. You can check that video out in the upper right corner. Any other year, and this is a pretty blatant instance of a team rubbing it in against a rival and running up the score. But in 1979, Jack Party's logic was sound. He said that he was worried about the possibility of point differential deciding a spot. Would his fears be justified? Turns out, they would be. The 2 major players here are the Chicago Bears and Washington. In one corner, you had Washington, a team that had been consistently solid all season. They jumped out to a 4-1 start and had won 4 of their last 5 games entering the final week. In their last two games, both at home at RFK Stadium, they dominated, defeating Green Bay 38-21 and Cincinnati 28-14. And in the other corner, you had Chicago, a team that had come out of nowhere to make a run at things. Chicago's season was seemingly dead in the water. After 8 weeks, the team was 3-5. However, the Bears defied the odds, and they won 6 of their last 7 games to get to 9-6 and have a shot at the postseason. They could even win the division if Tampa Bay lost their game to the Chiefs. However, the Bucs won that game 3-0 in some of the worst weather imaginable. So if the Bears were going to make the postseason, they would have to do it as a wild card. Here's the problem though. Dallas and Washington were playing each other on the final week of the season, with both teams sitting at 10-5. Let's assume that Chicago wins their game since a loss eliminates them entirely. If Washington won, then Dallas would own the tiebreaker over the Bears off of head-to-head record, as the Cowboys beat the Bears 24-20 in Week 3. If Dallas won, then Washington and Chicago would be tied at 10-6. Who owns the tiebreaker? Well, let's go to the board. The first tiebreaker is head-to-head record. Washington and Chicago never played against each other. The second tiebreaker is record within the conference. Both teams would be 8-4, so that didn't really do anything. The third tiebreaker is, you guessed it, point differential. Washington's point differential entering the final week was 54, while Chicago's was 21. That's a pretty significant difference. If Chicago was going to make it as the wild card after Tampa Bay's win, not only would the Bears have to win, and not only would Washington have to lose, but Chicago would have to make up 33 points in the differential. That takes us to December 16, 1979. The message for the Bears entering their game is simple. We need more points. To start off the day, the Bears are taking on the St. Louis Cardinals at Soldier Field. The good news for the Bears is that the Cards have absolutely nothing to play for. They're sitting at 5-10 and they've lost each of their last 4 games on the road. The bad news is that under interim coach Larry Wilson, the Cards are actually winning some games. Bud Wilkinson was relieved of his duties after Week 13 following a 34-28 loss to the Bengals, and Larry Wilson stepped in. Under Wilson's reign, the Cards were 2-0, defeating the 49ers 13-10, and then following that up with a 29-20 win over the Giants. That, combined with a wind chill of 16 and 19-mile-an-hour winds, were not good for Chicago. The Bears were favored by 4, but that wasn't going to be enough, not with a point differential they had to make up. There have been thousands upon thousands of games in NFL history, and with so many games, it is tough to say what the worst performance of all time by a quarterback is. But if you're looking for a good place to start or a good contender, this is the one. One of the reasons that Wilkinson was fired by the Cardinals was because of his refusal to play quarterback Steve Piskarowicz, the team's first-round pick in 1977. And with games like this, yeah, I'm guessing Wilkinson was telling his owner, I told you so. This game was bad. He went 5 for 28 while throwing no touchdowns and 2 interceptions and posting a 9.8 passer rating. And if that wasn't bad enough, he got sacked 8 times. For some perspective, I looked at every quarterback in NFL history to have a passer rating below 10 while throwing no touchdowns and 2 picks and getting sacked 8 times while completing under 20% of his passes and throwing for fewer than 70 yards. I could not find a single other instance of this occurring since the merger. It was that bad. Now that we've got that detail out of the way, let's talk about how the rest of the game went. They were playing with heavy hearts after their president, George Halas Jr., died earlier in the day. There were questions about how they were going to play in the wake of the tragedy, but they played inspired football and came out swinging. Walter Payton scored from 1 yard out to make it 7-0, the point differential having cut to 26. Then Dave Williams scored an 11-yard touchdown on a pass by Mike Phipps to make it 14-0. After 1 quarter, the point differential was at 19. Still some work to do, but this was definitely doable, especially with how poorly the Cards were looking offensively. And with a few minutes to go in the second quarter, the Bears were up 21-0 after a 5-yard touchdown run by Walter Payton. The point differential was now at 12. But the Bears knew what they had to do. They needed more points. And that was looking in danger at the end of the first half, when Mike Phipps got hurt, then a field goal attempt by Bob Thomas was blocked. When the third quarter started, the Bears had to punt on their opening drive, and Roy Green took it inside the red zone. And to make matters worse, after that awful first half that Piskarowicz had, Jim Hart was now in the game. The 4-time Pro Bowl quarterback was having a rough year up until that point, having thrown 9 touchdowns and 20 interceptions. But at this point, a cardboard cutout of Chevy Chase would have been better at QB than Piskarowicz. Hart found Pat Tilley for a 13-yard touchdown to make it a 21-6 game. Back up to 18 on the point differential following the blocked extra point. I should also note on this drive that 2 very important players on the Cards got hurt. Otis Anderson went down the play before. Anderson was already one of the best rushers in football and would eventually be named the Offensive Rookie of the Year. He was now out. And on that touchdown pass, Jim Hart got hurt. He was now out, meaning that Piskarowicz was back in. The bad news was that the Bears allowed a touchdown and had to find a way to make up 18 points. The good news was that based on the way Piskarowicz looked, and the fact that the Cards had no running game anymore, there was not a chance in the world that the Cards were scoring again unless the Bears made a mistake or gave them good field position. And fortunately for the Bears, they got the momentum back immediately. On the ensuing kickoff, Ricky Watts took it 83 yards to the house to give the Bears a 28-6 lead. The result of the game was no longer in question. Chicago was going to win. The only question was the point differential, which was now down to 11. The next drive was not as good for Chicago, as even though they started in the red zone following a blocked punt, Phipps threw a bad interception to Carl Allen. This was not only a touchdown-saving tackle by Dave Williams, but might have been a season-saving tackle considering the circumstances. The Cards did nothing on the drive, as the defense held and Piskarowicz continued to take a beating. Chicago's offense had gotten nothing going lately. The only points they had in their last 20 or so minutes came off of a kickoff return. Time for a fake punt. The good news was that the fake worked, but the bad news was they got nothing out of it because Bob Thomas came up short on a 36-yard field goal. Not too often you see kickers missing short from inside 40. Through 3 quarters, the differential was at 11, but the offense had not done anything lately. They needed to get something going to start the fourth quarter off. And that's exactly what they did. Ricky Watts made a huge play to get the Bears inside the red zone, and then Walter Payton scored his 3rd touchdown of the day, scoring from 4 yards out. The differential was down to 4. After the Cards got into the red zone and got nothing going, the Bears got the ball back. Mike Phipps finds Ricky Watts for a 35-yard touchdown. And with that, the Bears were up 42-6. Somehow, some way, the Bears had made up the point differential. They were down by 33. After blowing out the Cards, all the pressure was now on Washington to win. Part 1 of the equation was done. And now it didn't matter if Washington lost by 1 or by 50. If Washington lost, they're out. Now the Bears had to wait and see what would happen in Dallas. And what happened next was nothing short of nuts. The Bears game started at 2 o'clock and the Washington game started at 4 o'clock, meaning that there was some overlap between the end of one game and the start of the next. While Bears fans were happy and celebrating the fact that the point differential had been made up, they also probably realized that this was all for nothing. By the time Chicago's game ended, Washington had already built up a 10-0 lead after a 1-yard run by Joe Theismann. And to add insult to injury, at the start of the second quarter, Washington led 17-0 after a 55-yard receiving touchdown by Benny Malone. This was the last game Malone ever played in. He had been in the NFL since 1974. This was literally the only receiving touchdown he ever had in his career. It could not have come at a worse time for Chicago. Washington was up by 3 possessions on a team that they had already beaten earlier in the season. This wasn't going to happen. And after the post-game festivities were done in Chicago, all the Bears players left the facility knowing the score. The only people left were some reporters and head coach Neil Armstrong, who gathered around a radio. It was looking grim for the Bears, as Dallas had to find a way to overcome this deficit. But remember, this is the Dallas Cowboys we're talking about. They've done this before. Earlier in the season, they trailed 14-6 in the fourth quarter against the Giants, back when the 2-point conversion did not exist and they were down by 2 scores. Dallas won the game 17-14. In Week 1, they trailed 21-19 against the Cards with less than 2 minutes to go, and Dallas won the game. And against the Bears, the Cowboys were down 20-17 with about 2 minutes to go, and Dallas won the game. Basically, if any team was going to be able to pull a rabbit out of their hat and make this work, it was going to be the Dallas Cowboys. And that's exactly what happened. Kind of. On the ensuing drive, Ron Springs punched it in from a yard out to make it a 17-7 ball game. After forcing a stop, the Cowboys got the ball back and scored on a beautiful 26-yard touchdown pass from Roger Staubach to Preston Pearson with only a few seconds left in the half. Dallas was now down just 17-14. Hope was still alive for Chicago. And on their first drive of the second half, Robert Newsom scored from 2 yards out. 3 drives after being down 17-0, the Cowboys were now up 21-17. As things stood, the Bears would be in the postseason, and after 3 quarters, Dallas was still winning by that score. But to start the fourth quarter off, Washington cut the deficit to 1 on a 24-yard field goal by Mark Mosley. That made it 21-20. When Dallas gets the ball back, they're starting off inside their own 20. That's when Roger Staubach throws a really bad interception to Mark Murphy. How many plays does it take Washington to retake their lead? 2. That's it. One play to get down to the 1-yard line following a pass interference penalty, and another to get into the red zone after a John Riggins touchdown run. Washington now leads 27-21 with 10 minutes left in the game. Dallas goes 3 and out, and 2 plays after Washington gets the ball back, John Riggins takes it 66 yards to the house. Washington now leads at 34-21 with 7 minutes left. After that touchdown, all hope was seemingly lost. Bears coach Neil Armstrong, who was still in the locker room with the reporters listening to the game unfold, was in disbelief when Riggins ran it in, as he got up and left the room saying that the touchdown was long for him. Considering the fact that his longest rushing touchdown of the season was 7 yards, Armstrong had a point. He came back though, saying, "I still have a feeling that something good is going to happen for us." Dallas had 7 minutes to score 2 touchdowns and win the game. If they couldn't do that, then Washington would win the NFC East, and the Bears would be on the outside looking in. Could the Cowboys get something back on this drive? No. They went 3 and out, with the drive being capped off by Roger Staubach getting sacked on 3rd and 16. With under 6 minutes left, Washington had a 13-point lead and the ball. John Riggins fumbles, but it's recovered by Washington after looking for a brief moment like Dallas had it. Not wanting to give it to Riggins again, on the very next play with under 4 minutes left, Clarence Harmon is the one who gets the carry. He fumbles, and this time, Dallas recovers. There's 3:49 left in this game, and it seems like it's going to take a miracle for Dallas to win it and get Chicago into the postseason. But again, this is Roger Staubach we're talking about here, and it takes him just 3 plays to drive the Cowboys down the field. After a 26-yard touchdown pass to Ron Springs, Dallas trails by 6 points with 2:20 left. Instead of trying for the onside kick, Dallas decides to just boot it deep and trust their defense to get a stop. 3rd and 2 on the first play after the 2-minute warning, and Larry Cole makes the tackle of all tackles. Somehow, this is now doable. Because Cole blew that play up and prevented Washington from getting a first down, Dallas is getting the ball back with just under 2 minutes left. Get a touchdown, and the impossible becomes possible. Dallas eventually gets into Washington territory after what might be one of the greatest plays of Staubach's career. After somehow avoiding the sack, he finds Preston Pearson down the middle for the first down. Another throw to Pearson puts the Cowboys inside the red zone, as Tom Landry burns his last time out with just under a minute left. Somewhat questionable clock management on Landry's part, since you don't exactly want to give Washington any time to get the ball back. However, 2 plays later, it happens. Staubach finds Tony Hill for an 8-yard touchdown. After the all-important extra point, Dallas leads 35-34. They trail by 13 with under 4 minutes left and with Washington having the ball. And now they lead. Time runs out on Washington as they can't get their timeout to set up a possible Mark Mosley field goal attempt, and with that, the game is over. The Cowboys win, and the Bears are in. Just to recap everything that had to happen, the Bears had to make up a point differential of 33 to even have a shot. If that happened, then Washington, who was up by 17 in the second quarter, and was up by 13 with 4 minutes left and the ball, would have to lose. Somehow, both of those things happened, and the Bears made the postseason in what might be the craziest Week 17 scenario of all time. The tiebreaker system had its complaints, including from Jack Pardee, who said that point differential had to be the worst way possible to break a tie, and from Bears general manager Jim Finks, who was vocal about his displeasure for the system, but said that he wasn't complaining this week. And the following year, point differential got relegated to a lower tiebreaker, as the next tiebreaker up after head-to-head in conference record was the record against common opponents. Nowadays, point differential is so far down the pecking order that it makes a scenario like this almost impossible. Is point differential a silly way to decide who goes into the postseason? Perhaps. Does it lead to some insanely fun and wacky scenarios? Absolutely. Even though it didn't lead to anything, as the Bears lost 27-17 in the wildcard round to the Eagles, it doesn't take away from what happened. What Chicago pulled off in 1979 was nothing short of a miracle. So if you want to know if there was ever a scenario like the one that happened 20 years later, where teams were fighting for a spot on point differential and it actually mattered, as it turns out, that already happened. In 1979, the Bears got more points. Be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaredGator9 and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping with the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.